we are towards the end of the Gemara. So the Gemara talking about did Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel follow their own opinion? Did Beis Shammai follow their own opinion, or did they not? And the Gemara ends with a proof from the previous daf, ended with a proof from the discussion with the Bnei Hatzaras. So the question wasn't only whether the Tzaras Abbas is going to be prohibited or obligated in Mechuyev in Yibum, but what about, according to Beis Hillel, where the Tzaras Abbas, who according to Beis Shammai should have had Yibum, went out without any marriage, without any Yibum, and married someone else, a child born from that is now going to be Bnei Tzaras Abbas, who should have, according to Beis Shammai, had Yibum. And so she was a Zakuka Yibum. And without any Chalitza, went out and married. So those children are going to be Pagum. So that's a question of Bnei Tzaras Abbas Ani Meid Lechem. That's what he said, that Beis Hillel would have been, that the children of a Tzara, according to Beis Hillel, would have been a Pagum to Beis Shammai, and they were not. So Taisus here asks,
they would not have been pagum according to Beis Shammai?
No, they would have been a pagum according to Beis Shammai, and we see the Beis Shammai were noyeg according to them. Were noyeg according to the Beis Hillel. In other words, that they.
We're talking about Rabbi Yeshua.
Sorry,
we're talking about Rabbi Yeshua.
This is Rabbi Yeshua's statement. Yeah.
Rabbi Yeshua was made that the Bnei Tzaros were Kohanim, right? So wasn't he answering that? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
So he's answering that that according to Beis Shammai they weren't pagum and they were able to be Kohanim, right?
They would have been pagum, so they should not have been Kohanim, right?
So why is he being? So why were they Kohanim then?
That's proving that they accepted Beis Hillel as a psak, and they allowed them to be Kohanim. Right, that's what the Gemara is trying to be made.
You're talking about Tes Vav on the base.
Tes Zayin Amud Aleph, the first line.
Bnei Tzaros Ani Meid Lachem. Yeah, but I mean that's he's talking about, that's explaining what he just said before on Tes Vav on the base, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so Tes Vav on the base, he was saying that he told them that the Bnei Tzaros basically they were Kohanim Gedolim, and he explained that according to Beis Shammai, these kids were not pagum, and from there you learn what Beis Hillel would say about a vlad of a machzir grushaso.
Yeah, that.
So he's saying according to Beis Shammai they're not pagum, and that's how we know the din that Bnei Chayav Elavin are pagum. Are you saying that according to Beis Shammai they are pagum? That's what I'm getting confused about.
No, he's trying to prove that Beis Shammai accepted these children, and they should have been pagum, according to Beis Shammai. That was the question. That was what our question was. They should have been pagum. They should have been pagum because they were chayv lavin. They were iser of it's a iser yevama l'shuk. She was a yevama that's a zakuka l'yibum. She's required to have yibum and didn't. So as a zakuka l'yibum, the bnei tzara should be pagumim, and they're not.
Okay.
Look at Rashi. Now, so Tosfos asks a question. Tosfos asks, B'nai Tzoros ani made lechem the ksheir mafla b'shamai, that they were kosher according to b'shamai, and that we see, like Max said, we can learn for Chai B'Lavin, but we see that they were that b'shamai also accepted these kahanim. So Tosfos asks, there's a question. The Gemara later on has a shaila. Yevama l'shuk, yeah. If kedushin are kedushin types into Yevama l'shuk. That means a Yevama, her husband died. She's supposed to have yibum, and instead of having yibum or chalitza, she just goes ahead and accepts kedushin from someone else. Does that kedushin take effect or not? So the Gemara says, if you hold that kedushin is types of Yevama l'shuk, if you say that it does take effect, so I have a problem. As soon as she accepted Kiddushin from someone else, even according to Beishamai, that she should have had Yibum, she's a Tzaras Ereva. Beis Hillel say, you don't need Yibum. Beishamai say, oh, you need Yibum. And therefore, if you want to marry someone else, you have to have Chalitza. But she went ahead and she accepted Kiddushin from someone else. That Kiddushin takes effect. At this moment, she is now an Ereva. She herself became an Ereva because she's a married woman. And therefore, there's no Yibum. So the Zika would fall away. That's what Tosfos asks, what should be the Gemara. So there is no such thing as a Yevama l'shuk where where the child is a pagum. A Yevama l'shuk, anyhow, the child's not a pagum because as soon as she goes out l'shuk, meaning she marries someone else outside of this of the brothers of the deceased, in any case, the Zika is over because she's now an erva to them, and she's no longer a Yevama. That's Tosfos' question. Question clear? Akin, question clear?
If take Yibum out of the picture for a moment, if a woman was married to one man and then went and married a second,
accepted Kiddushin from a second, it does not take effect.
It does not take effect. Okay.
Right. Over here, since it's in this limbo space, it's in mid-transfer, there's a Zika, so the Gemara asks, does Kiddushin take effect? Does Kiddushin not take effect? But if Kiddushin takes effect, and that's essentially what we're talking about here, is that according to Beishamai, she should not have accepted Kiddushin from someone else. She still needs Chalitza first, but she didn't do that. And she followed Beis Hillel, which say that she doesn't need Chalitza. And now she married someone else and has a child. That child is not a B'nai Pagum. It's not a B'nai Tzoros. She no longer is a part of Yibum anyhow because the Zika's gone because she's now a married woman, if the Kiddusha takes effect. So Tosfos has two answers. The first answer Tosfos says is V'yesh lo v'lo yidam midahasam ein shum takana lasa shetasiyabim she'ed lahamas hachoisa aval hayivama sheniskacha l'shuk efshel takane gerish shetasiyabim hilkach lepakazika. So Tosfos makes a distinction and says there the case is where there's a question if Kiddushin took effect or not, and if the Kiddushin took effect, then there is the Zika would go away. Here, actually, the Zika does not go away because there's a fix. The way to fix it is divorce her. So the Zika so Ruvain died. His almana is now in this transfer to one of the brothers. There's a Zika. And then she accepts Kiddushin from just somebody off on the street, not related. That accepting the Kiddushin, Tosfos asked, should negate the Zika. Why should it negate the Zika? Because right now she's usser. Yeah, but there's a fix. You can unusserize her. Just give again. And since you can make that, you could get rid of that Isser of Eshes Ish, the Erva of Eshes Ish. So the original Zika remains because it's still possible to transfer to a surviving brother. To one of the brothers of the mace, it's still possible to transfer. That's Tosfos' first answer. Tosfos' second answer needs an explanation as well. Tosfos' answer is, well, there's Xeris HaKasav that Yevamot it can't have Kiddushin. Well, we're asking according to the opinion that it does. But leave that aside. The second answer, Tosfos says, is Xeris HaKasav. Fine. But the first answer, Tosfos is saying that anytime you could undo that marriage, you could give a get, Kiddushin should not take effect. Sorry, the Kiddushin should not negate the Zika. Since you can undo the Kiddushin, you can give a get, so the Zika remains intact. And all the Achronim basically ask a question, but this is contradictory to Tosfos and Daf Yud. Tosfos and Daf Yud asks a very interesting question. This is called Balas Tanai, a woman who is within a Tanai, condition. So some guy was married to a woman and divorced her. And when he divorced her, he said, I divorce you on the condition you can marry whoever you want. One condition, you may not marry Shimon. It's called Tanai. Marry anybody but Shimon. And she doesn't marry Shimon. She marries Reuven, Shimon's brother. She marries Reuven. And then Reuven dies childless. So now she needs a Yibum. But she can't do Yibum because in regards to Shimon, the surviving brother, she's still a Eshes Ish to the first guy. Because if she marries Shimon, then the original get is null and void. And then she's an Eshes Ish and never was married to Reuven. So she can't do Shimon. That's called Balas Tanai. And Tosfos says over there that indeed that would negate the Zika because of this calculation that she's an Eshes Ish in regards to Shimon. So the Achronim ask, wait 1 second, but a get can undo that Eshes Ish. If the original husband who gave this conditional get says, I now give you a complete unconditional get, that would allow for the Zika to continue. So why is there no Zika? So some Achronim say that the reason is because that was, in our case, at first there was a proper Zika. The husband died. The almana, the widow, now is in Zika to the brother. She accepted Kiddushin. That would negate it. But there was originally a Zika. That's powerful enough that the Tosfos asks it shouldn't be negated by accepting Kiddushin because you can undo the Kiddushin. However, in the case of Daf Yud by Balas Tanai, actually there never was a Zika because at the moment of the death of the first brother, there is no brother, that surviving brother that can have Kiddushin. It has to be, and the Achronim deal at length with this idea that Zika has to happen at the moment of death. At the moment that the original husband died, that's when that Zika, that transfer of the Kiddushin has to happen. And if at that moment it's blocked, it cannot happen. It cannot go further. Our case, actually, it starts off with that there's a Zika, according to Beis Shammai, right? Because they say it's a tzara. And now when she accepted it, tzara is able to do evil. And now when she accepts Kiddushin from someone else, that would negate the Zika. That's already there. For that, it's not going to help because the Kiddushin can be undone. That's the way some of Farshim say. But Rabbi Shimon Shkup says here, it says a very interesting thing, and this would explain the concept Tosfos is saying. He says the distinction is in Daf Yud by the Balas Aget, by the Balas Tanai. Who would have to give the get in order for the Zika to come back into play? Someone else. The players that are here now, they can't do this. It's not biyada of the current husband to undo it. It's a previous husband that would have to give a get. That's why the Zika is not there. It's not biyada. Tosfos over here is saying the person that made the Kiddushin can undo it. It's biyada. It's right here, right now, the ability to do it. That's why the Zika is still intact. The Zika is intact because whoever made that Kiddushin is able to undo the Kiddushin. In Daf Yud, you'd have to track down somebody that had no relationship to this scenario, that previously had made some sort of condition in his get prior to this marriage, and prior to the Zika, and prior to the Yibum. That's Eina B'Yada. And that's why the Zika would be negated by the Kiddushin, by her becoming Eishes Ish, or being in the state of Eishes Ish. So that's.
Can you repeat the timeline of the earlier Gemara?
Daf Yud?
Of the earlier Tosfos?
The Tosfos Daf Yud?
Yeah.
Timeline. Yeah. In 1999, Reuven marries, no, not Reuven. In 1999, Avraham marries Rachel. In 2000, he divorces Rachel and makes a condition. He says you can marry anybody you want besides for Shimon. In 2005, she marries Reuven, Shimon's brother. In 2010, Reuven dies childless. Now, she can't, there's only one surviving brother, Shimon. Shimon can't do Yibum because if she were to marry Shimon, retroactively she's never divorced from Avram. Because the get was conditional. And so there would be no Zika. Actually, there would not even be a marriage to Reuven because she was an Eishes Ish. So then, so Elamai, the Zika can't be there because she's an Eishes Ish if that Zika is there. So the marriage to Reuven, the marriage to Avram originally in 1999 is preventing the Zika from going on now. So what do you want to say? Well, go back to Avram in 2000 and tell him, why don't you give an unconditional get? That's not biyada. That's not a part of our scenario at all. There is nobody there that can make that that demand. That's a previous scenario. Here, in our case, the timeline is this. Reuven dies. He has two wives. One of them is an Erva, and the Tzaras Erva, according to Beishamai, needs Yibum. So he died in 2015. That same time, according to Beishamai, there's a Zika. According to Beishamai, there's no Zika. And in 2017, she goes ahead and she marries somebody in the Shuk, just meaning somebody not related to the scenario. But she's now married to someone who can undo that and allow for the Zika to continue. That is biyado. That's why it should really be there. Okay? So that's the explanation of Shimon Shkop. The other Achronim said that no, it's whether the Zika was there before the Eishes Ish problem came in, or versus the Eishes Ish issue was there prior and never allowed the Zika to start. So the Gemara continues, and the Gemara tells the story of Rav Dosa ben Horkanes. Rav Dosa ben Horkanes, it was told, was paskening like Beishamai, that Tzaras Abbas, that Tzaras Abbas, meaning Tzaras Erva, is chayiv in a Yibum. The Gemara tells us the story. He was ill. He was elderly and ill, and wasn't coming to the academy anymore, to the yeshiva, and so they didn't know how to argue with him. And so they said, "Okay, who's going to go argue with him?" By the way, the Gemara in Ksubis tells us that he was of the original Beis Din that came out of after the Churban. The Rambam in Pirush Mishnayos says that he was very elderly, because by the time Rabbi Akiva is coming on and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is coming in, if he was alive at the time of the Beis Hamikdash destruction, he would have been well over 100 years old, maybe 200 years old. So a lot of Mefarshim saying that it doesn't mean that he himself saw Chagai, which would be way hundreds of years old, but rather he, as we'll see soon, he testifies where Chagai, he has a tradition where Chagai made his statement, but it actually is he was, but nevertheless, what's clear is that he was of the generation of the Churban, and he's dealing with the Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah Rabbi Akiva, which is well after that. So he's a Rabbi Dosa ben Horkanis, an elderly Chacham, but he was of the Beis Shammai, and he's paskening Tzoras Abbas that Tzoras Erva is obligated in Yibum. So they say, who's going to go? So the Gemara says, Mi elech v'yodio. So who's going to go tell him that, look, the Chachamim disagree, l'chaim aki l'chaim. Who's going to disagree? Tell him that we disagree. Amalei Rabbi Yeshua, ani elech. So Rabbi Yeshua says, I will go. Rabbi Yeshua, also being a Talmud of Yochanan ben Zakkai, is of the generation immediately after the Churban Habayis, the elder of all of the Chachamim, and he says, I'll go. Maybe he's younger than Rabbi Dosa ben Horkanis, but definitely of the older Chachamim. He says he'll go. Va'achar of me. Okay, who else will go? Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. So they said Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah being of the youngest of the Chachamim, and he's also, as we know from the story of where Rabbi Gamliel, pushed Rabbi Yeshua on account of his psak, that Rabbi Gamliel was deposed, and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, being 18 years old, became wait, what happened? Hello?
I'm still
there. And I don't know what's going on here. My Zoom is going wacky. Okay. So Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was the youngest, and he comes in, and he's also going. So we have Rabbi Yeshua, the eldest, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, the younger the Chachamim, and me, Acharav me, Rabbi Akiva, and the next is going to be Rabbi Akiva, who's definitely younger than Rabbi Yeshua, but seemingly older than Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. And Tosas Iksubis, who deals with when the Chachamim mention names of multiple Chachamim, are we going in age order or Chashivas order, or is there no order? Tosas deals with that because the Gemara over there in the Mishnah says two Chachamim and two Dayanim of Yerushalayim, Admon and Chanan ben Avshalom, and in the Brisa it brings that there were three Dayanim, and it says also Chanan HaMitzri. Now Chanan HaMitzri was more chashav, Tosas brings, and so Tosas tries working out over there in Ksubis who, when the Gemara quotes Chachamim in these orders, are we going by age, or are we going by the Chashivas? So Tosas brings from our Gemara, and Tosas Ksubis Daf Kuf Hey Amud Aleph and Divrei Masal the Chashivle. Tosas says that nearly the chashav le hachashav yoser, that the Gemara will count the one who is most chashav. The alpha gav the Chanan HaMitzri bereishon, even though it says Chanan HaMitzri first. In the Agada story, right? We have the list of all the Chachamim sitting in Bnei Barak, and it says Ma'aser Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Shua, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was more chashav than Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. How do we know that? Sure, Reish l'Chachamim, because he was the Rabbi Akiva was the head of the Chachamim. Not only that, Rabbi Akiva Chavero, and the Gemara often will list when it wants to say a certain generation, it'll say Rabbi Akiva and his Chaverim, Rabbi Akiva and his generation. So we see Rabbi Akiva, the generation is called Rabbi Akiva's generation. So we see that Rabbi Akiva is more chashuv. And also that the halacha is like Rabbi Akiva from his chaverim as well. A chaver, singular. And then the Gemara says, then Tosafos says, so what about our Gemara? Where we have Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah in the middle, after Rabbi Yeshua, before Rabbi Akiva. The Gabe Ma'aser Rabbi Dosa ben Horkanis, in our story, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Akiva. And when they came in, that he said also, he introduced Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah first. Why did he do that? And so we see Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is younger. How do we know Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was younger? Because he didn't even know that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah existed. So in the story, right, Rabbi Dosa says to Rabbi Dosa can't see, and Rabbi Yeshua comes in and he sits him down and he says, oh, there's another student here, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. He says, whoa, Azariah, our friend, has a son, right? Because Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was only 18 years old when he became Nasi. So he's young. So he didn't even know that he exists. But then when he says, oh, there's another student here, Rabbi Akiva ben Yosef, he says, oh, you're Akiva ben Yosef that everybody knows of? So we see that he knew of Rabbi Akiva. He did not know of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah because Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is younger. And yet, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is mentioned first. Right? So we see Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is mentioned first. Time, and this is the reason. Because Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was a 10th generation from Ezra, and he was the Nasi, and so he gets mentioned first. So we see that a chashivas, a certain stature, will be mentioned first, even though that he was younger, and even though that it was perhaps in other areas less important. The halach is like Rabbi Akiva over Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, and yet Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is mentioned first. That's an interesting part over here, especially since the Gemara is looking for who's going to go to Rabbi Dosa, the elder, and tell him that the halacha is not like he's saying, and the Gemara takes Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah first. It's interesting to understand that the seder of why this is. In any case, so he sits them down, each one of them, and they start talking to him in halacha. They don't want to directly go to the topic where they come to challenge him. So he says, Shev b'ni Shev kamoischa, my son, sit down. Kamoischa yirbi b'Yisrael. There should be many like you in Yisrael. So they started circling various halachas to him until they steered the conversation to our topic, Tzoras Abbas. If there's a Tzoras Erva, does the Tzoras Erva need Yibum or not? Amr le Tzoras Abbas Mao. Amalehen Machlekes Beishamei Bishil. It's Machlekes Beishamei Bishil. Okay, great. So that part they knew. Halacha kedivrei mi. And who is the halacha like? And this is the part they came for. Amalehen halacha Beis. Now halacha is like Beis Hillel. Whoa, mind blown. We thought we're coming here to challenge you because you say the halacha is like Beis Shammai, and really the halacha is like Beis Hillel. And he's saying the halacha is like Beis Hillel. Amr lev alem shimcha. Amr halacha ke Beis Shammai. But they said in your name, the halacha is like Beis Shammai. Amalem doisa shamatim or ben Hurkanes shamatim. Did you hear the son of Hurkanes or did you hear doisa? Because I never said it, but I have a brother who is a b'chor satam. Is a text we have, which Rashi says b'chor satam means he refuses to listen. He's very sharp. He's b'chor in chachma. He's very smart, but satam, he stands in his way and won't change even if the majority rule against him. And so perhaps perhaps that's what you heard. But then he says, I want you to know, I swear, Chaye Rebbe. No, so they said we heard just Justam, meaning Ben Hurkanes, and we thought it meant you. So he said no. So he said, I want you to know he's a student of Beis Shammai, but be careful with him because he's going to argue with you, and he has 300 responses, 300 proofs that Tzoras Abbas needs to is in Yibum. But I have to testify to you. I testify. I bring the heavens and earth to testify. In this very place, and he points to the place or explains the place. Yoshav Chagai Hanavi. Thank you. Chagai Hanavi came, sat, and he said 3 halachas. Now, why does he have to mention the 3 halachas? There are different mafarshim. Some say simply it would be, look, I want to tell you what actually happened. This is what happened in this place. Chagai Hanavi said the halacha is about these three matters, and so I'm telling you, trust me that this is true because I can tell you, verbatim what happened, what he said, where it was. Other Mefarshim say that that he was addressing each one of the Chachamim. The three Chachamim had three halachas. The Chagai said each one that pertains to another place where they held differently. In any case, so he says three things: Tzaras Abbas Asura, Amanamad Masrin, Maisa'ani. Tzaras Abbas is prohibited, like we said. There's no yibum. Also, that Amanamad, the area of Amanamad that was captured by Sichon, and then it's on the other side of the river on Shemitah year. What do? Since there's no Shemitah, and now Jews live there, so what Meiser are you going to take? You don't take the Meiser of the first 2 years or the fourth and fifth year, which Meiser Sheni, because it's a Shemitah year. You also don't do Meiser Ani because that's only in the third and sixth year. It's the seventh year, so what do? So Chagai said there also it's going to be Meiser Ani. And the third halach he said is Mekabel Gerim min HaKarduyin u'min Mudin, that we accept Gerim from these places. And the Gemara is going to analyze each one of these. But Taisus is going to address the next line, which is problematic. So he says this is the halacha, and then they leave from three different times from three different doors. So Taisus says, so why did they leave three different doors? And eventually, actually, what happened was that Rabbi Akiva encountered his brother, and he challenged him about this halacha. But the Tosfos asks, why did they leave from different doors? And Tosfos in the first answer says, the reason they left the three different doors is so that he not meet them, because if he was going to meet them, if Yonasan ben Horkanus was going to meet them, the three of them would have to accept his arguments because he would have disproven them, and then they would have to say the halacha is like it, which is a very peculiar thing. Why did they have to say the halacha is like it? They have a Kabbalah. They have a Kabbalah what the halacha is, so you don't have to say the halacha is like that. Why would they have to say the halacha is like them? So, that's number one. Number two, if they do have to say the halacha is like them, so why are they avoiding it? Where's the judicial honesty? Go out, make the arguments, and if you lose, so you have to say the halacha is like that. So the halacha is like that. So this is not the first time we see this. We see the same thing, and we saw earlier with Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, that actually, when in the Gzeira of Beis Shammai in the Yudches Davar, what happened was that they were together in the Aliyah of Ben Gurion, and they were discussing halacha, and they realized Beis Shammai were the majority, so the Beis Hillel wanted to leave, so that there wouldn't be a kvias halacha. And they put a sword at the door, they put a guard at the door and said, no one's leaving. This way they had to remain there and argue it out, and eventually lost the majority. And the halacha for those 18 things were paskin like Beis Shammai. But we see that the Beis Hillel were trying to get out of this. It means that there's a concept that you don't have to put yourself in a place where you're going to be the minority, and the halacha is going to be paskin in a manner that you know that that's not the Masorah. As Rabbi Tzvi ben Horkanus said, we have an edus from Chagai that the halacha is Tzaras Abbas is Asura, that there's no yibum for Tzaras Erva, and therefore why should we go and have him argue? The arguments are great, but that's, we know that that's not the halacha. And so they have a right to avoid it. If that's the case, so even if they met it, the question is, why would they have to accept the halacha like the arguments of Rabbi Yonasan ben Dosa, Rabbi Yonasan ben Horkanus? So what? If somebody comes to you and says, I can prove to you with a halacha a sheretz is mutter, it's tahor, right? As the Gemara says that before, Rabbi Meir was so great that he could have done that. So what? We wouldn't paskin that way, even if I don't have an answer to the question. You ask me a question, you can prove that a sheretz is tahor. Okay, great. I don't have an answer to your question. That doesn't change what we know. It's a pasuk in the Torah. Or, in the same way, it's the Masorah. This is we know, ish mipi ish, from Moshe Rabbeinu, this is the halacha. Chagai sat on this bench and said the halacha is, Soras Abbas, is usher. There's no yibum. So why would they have to accept Rabbi Yonasan ben Hurkanas's arguments? I don't have an answer. Rabbi Elchanan has a lengthy explanation as to the concept of that. Really, there is a place in halacha for this. There is a mimer that people say. I don't know the first source for it. It's definitely a pretty relatively new statement that in the days of Mashiach, the halacha will be like Beis Shammai. It's not in it's not in the Gemara. It's in some of the more contemporary teachings, but nevertheless, there's such a statement. So Rochanan, using that, says you see that it's not that there is no place of Masorah for it. It's just not the current Masorah. It's the place of Masorah, and so they may have had to accept it. In any case, it is a question to understand what is Tosis, what is the basis of Tosis, that if somebody asks you a question or brings you a proof, but you know that's not the Masorah, you know that that's not the halacha, then do you now have to accept that as halacha? In any case, so Rabbi Akiva, the Gemara says, however, and this is the first explanation of Tosis, that they went out through separate doors so that they wouldn't meet up with Rabbi Yonasan ben Hurkanus, so that they wouldn't have to accept him, because now it's 1-1, whereas if it was a majority, then they would have to accept the halacha. In any case, Rabbi Akiva met up with him, and Rabbi Akiva, he ended up challenging Rabbi Akiva on Soras Abbas, and Rabbi Akiva didn't have an answer, and so he said to him, "It's wonderful, Rabbi Akiva, that you have a great name. However, you haven't even reached like Ro'ei Bakar, like you haven't even attained the level of Ro'ei Bakar, a cattle shepherd." To which Rabbi Akiva responded, "You're right. Not only that, I haven't even reached a shepherd of tzon, of sheep." So what's going on here? He's insulting Rabbi Akiva, saying you're not even like a cattle shepherd, and Rabbi Akiva is responding, actually, it's even less than that. I'm not even a shepherd of sheep. Who says a shepherd of sheep is worse? How is that less? Our ancestors, Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Moshe, they were shepherds of sheep. What's all so bad about this? So the Marsha says that he said to him, "I know what you're doing. You are relying upon Chagai Zachari Malachi, right? You're relying on Chagai. That Chagai testified that the halacha is Soras Abbas. Well, actually, there was a prophet before him who was a Ro'ei Bakar, who called himself a shepherd of pasture, and you didn't reach that. In other words, that shepherd of cattle, he says that the halacha is like me. And who was that? That was you're from the last of the shepherd of the prophets, from Chagai. Well, I have a Kabbalah from an earlier one, from Amos, because Amos called himself a shepherd of Bakar. To which Rabbi Akiva says, great, I'm not relying on Chagai or Amos. I'm relying on the shepherd of sheep, of Moshe Rabbeinu. Yeah, this is a Masara Ishmi Piesh from Moshe Rabbeinu. So that's the way the Marsha explains it. However, there are other explanations. The Maratzchia says that he was hinting to him about an occurrence that Rabbi Akiva had changed the calendar in Chutz La'aretz, which is only allowed to be done if there's no one like him in Eretz Yisrael. And he said that there were in Eretz Yisrael there were people that were Roy Bakar that were worthy of doing it, as Allah is. That's the. But I want to read a Chasam Sofer. The Chasam Sofer in his Hesped, in his eulogy, his Hesped for his father-in-law, Rabbi Akiva Eger. So he quotes this Gemara, and he says, "What's going on here?" So he says that whenever we say the Allah is kamose, and Allah is like Rabbi Akiva, we know the Allah Rabbi Akiva mechaveira. Whenever there's an argument, Rabbi Akiva and one other chacham, the Allah is like Rabbi Akiva. So on account of what is Allah like someone? Is it on account of chachma, or is it on account of something else? So he quotes from the Gemara that even though that person can be a chacham and attain chachma, to get halacha, to be able to get a sukish shmaitza to a place of that you have the siyata d'shmai to come to that halacha lamaisa, that requires a chassid, someone who does chesed between people. It is the kindness between one person and another that will make the halacha kamasa. As we see that we saw before, why was the halacha like Beis Hillel? On account of the anivus, on account of the midos and the bein adam chaver, that they would quote their chaverim first. So the midah of chesed is Avraham, and Avraham is representative of chesed through Elabakar Ratz Avram. Avram went to get cattle, to get a cow, a bull, to feed his guests. Din is and the midah of Mishpat is Yaakov, and he was a shepherd of sheep. So Dosef ben Horkinus was saying to him, the halacha is not like you, Rabbi Akiva. The halacha is not like you because you haven't attained the chesed which is required to attain halacha kamoso on account of the bein adam lechavero. That's what he was hinting to. You haven't attained Avram's midah, and that he responded, I haven't attained halacha kamoso even in chachma because I have not reached that. Either way, Rabbi Akiva is, according to these mefarshim, Rabbi Akiva is responding in modesty, saying, no, it is. In fact, I'm even less than what you think I am. However, according to the Marsha, Rabbi Akiva is not saying Rabbi Akiva is not speaking in modesty. Rather, Rabbi Akiva is saying, I have a Masorah all the way to Moshe Rabbeinu, and the halacha is like him on account like me on account of this is the Masorah, not from Chagai, not from Amos. The halacha is from Moshe Rabbeinu, Ishmi Piyish, that Tzaras Abbas is Muteris, is Asura, there's no Yib. Okay. So the next halacha that the Gemara goes to, or by the way, there's a fascinating, in the back of the Gemara, there's a commentary of the Mitzvah Esan. And in the Mitzvah Esan, he has a cute, not cute, a very fascinating but unique gematria here on Rabbi Akiva. So he did a count. You can either trust him and do your own count. But he says, you should know. When he said that you, Rabbi Akiva, your name is known, misofa olam ad sofa. Your name is known from one end of the world to the other. So he says, you should know that misofa olam ad sofa is gematria tuf kuf samach daled, and is 564. misofo olam atzofo. And that is the exact amount of times that Rabbi Akiva mentioned in the Gemara. 564. You, Rabbi Akiva, your name is misofo olam atzofo. You're mentioned in Shas Tov Kuf Samach Daled times. However, the halacha is like you. The halacha is like him. Sha'ah, 375 times. So is an otzer balum. He's in a storehouse because the halacha kamosai, because Shah omedeslo. The Shah is what stands with him. In any case, interesting gematria that Rabbi Akiva's misofa olam atzofa, his name is from one end of the world to the other, is the 564 times Rabbi Akiva is mentioned in Shas. Rabbi Deichman, your next project is to count that and assess the accuracy of that accounting. So the Gemara goes into Ammon and Moav, the area of Ammon and Moav not having Shemitah, and even though they don't have Shemitah, they have a Meiser. So the Mefarshim ask a lot over here. This is Mishnah Melech asks about it. Essentially, the Ole Bavel, the Gemara says that the Ole Bavel didn't recapture this area, but was it captured by the Ole Mitzrayim? That's what the Gemara seems to say. If that's the case, so if it was originally part of Eretz Yisrael, so then it should be, then it should have Shemitah, or at least Shemitah Midorabanan. There's a Mishnah Melech at the beginning of Shvias that you're allowed to eat from such land, but you're not allowed to work the land. So therefore, it should not be Chayv and Meiser, because if you're not allowed to work the land, then it's Hefker. So there are different Mefarshim, that different things to try and answer this. Tosfos over here has a few distinctions. Tosfos makes, in one distinction, Tosfos says there's a chiluk between the land that was originally part of Midian and the lands that Klal Yisrael had a right to, versus the land of Ammon and Moav that really Am Yisrael has no right to the land of Ammon and Moav. However, since Sichon first captured the land of Ammon and Moav, so Tiharu, they allowed for Bnei Yisrael to win over that land in war on account of that it was already captured by another country. It was the borders moved on account of a battle with Sichon, and Sichon won. So now Am Yisrael was allowed to win it from Sichon. Those lands of Ammon and Moav were never Niskadish. They never became part of Eretz Yisrael because it wasn't land that we originally were allowed to take. That's one answer to this. It says, and therefore this land would have been this separate land. The Mishnah Melech asks, okay, so if it's land that never came back to Am Yisrael, never really was Kaddish in Shemitah, so why did the Chachamim make now a new halacha of that you can't that you have to take Meiser from there? It never was a part of Eretz Yisrael. So the Mefarshim have a lot of it becomes convoluted. Is it, where do you have such a thing where it's Shemitah enough that you can't really work the land? It's Shemitah not enough of Shemitah, and therefore you're obligated in Meiser Ani, and you're working the land to some degree. Where do you have this in between, that it was originally part of Eretz Yisrael, or now it's a part of Eretz Yisrael, and somehow you have this hybrid? It's Shemitah year, and you have to tithe produce that you're working the land. How does that work? Aki, you had your hand up? No. Oh, you did for that, L'chaim. So that's with that. Let's go to the.
Sorry, didn't mean to distract.
No problem. As we turn the page of Gemara, it talks about what about these Gerim from these places of Tarma? Do you take them or not? And there's a question of whether they were Mamzer or not. And Tosfos here goes to various halachas that are are very difficult to understand. One thing Tosfos says is we know that there's a machlokes between Rabbi Akiva and Shimon HaTimani and Rabbi Yeshua. What creates a mamzer? Rabbi Akiva is very strict. Rabbi Akiva says any chayve lavin, a child born from a prohibited marriage, even on a lav level, and according to one version, even on an asay level, the child would be a mamzer. The halacha is like Shimon HaTimani, that's only if there was a kares. Rabbi Yeshua says that even if there was misas based, right? Either way, Tosfos is going with this statement of trying to establish what is the halacha of this mamzer. This is Tosfos on Amud Beis Hamarai, and Tosfos says. Miu al kach tzarich lemi the lesle halacha gestam mishnah. The ha kasavar even kachave ever aval bas Yisrael avlad mamzer estam asnit and aimes svara the avlad kosher. The Rabbi Akiva dafka by the kedusha terms of b'chai b'lav. So it brings the statement to say that a eved v'akum abal bas Yisrael, a non-Jew, or a non-Jew or a eved who has a child with Yisrael, havlad mamzer. The child would be a mamzer. Now, that's Rabbi Akiva's opinion. However, the Mishnah says that that's not so. The halacha is the havlad kosher. The child is a kosher, a regular child. And that Rabbi Akiva asks a question that actually, and it's the halacha of the Gemara in Sanhedrin, that there is, unless somebody's from the 7 amamim, from Kanani, Chiti, Emori, Prizi, etc., there actually is no Isser Lav even. There is no Lav for a Jewish woman to marry a non-Jewish man or vice versa. It's Derabanan. It's not something you want to announce to for the world of intermarriage, but that is the halacha. The lav is specifically look to schatinbam, don't intermarry, is the lav, the prohibition of marrying to the shiva abamin. So how can you say that there's a lav and therefore it's a question of chayve lavin? Actually, there's no lav at all. And the Mefarshim say that indeed, when we say that the Gemara, that the Rabbi Akiva would hold, Eved va'akum abal bas Yisrael of Vlad Mamzer, that an Eved or a non-Jew has a child from a Jewish woman, the child is a Mamzer, it's only on Eved. Because the Eved, there is a lav, lo siya kadesha. But for an Akum, there is no lav. So that's, so indeed, that even Rabbi Akiva would only be talking about as a mamzer d'oraisa would only be on a lav d'oraisa, which is for an eved. Tosfos has later on in the Tosfos has a chiddush in the reverse. Tosfos says just as if we say an eved that has a child from a Jewish woman, the child's a mamzer, so too if a Jewish man has a child from a shifcha, the child would be a mamzer. Now, there you have a bigger problem. The Avnei Miluim already asks, and many Mefarshim ask, what are you talking about? The child's not Jewish. If the child's not Jewish, then it can't be a mamzer. Mamzer is a definition within the status of a Jew. But if the child's not if the mother is not Yisraelis, so then the child's not Jewish. How can you have a mamzer on that level? Now, if you're talking about a shifcha, so it could be that to some degree it's Jewish. So you can have a mamzer shifcha. There is such a thing as, an opinion like that in the Gemara. But if you're talking about a akum, so the mother's not even Jewish. The Avnei Miluim brings from a Gemara in the end of Kiddushin that there is such a thing as a mamzer eved, like I just mentioned, which is that the father was a mamzer, and the mother was a shifcha, and that would and even though there's no the child isn't fully Jewish because the mother isn't fully Jewish, nevertheless the mamzeros of the father would go ahead and transfer to the child. This is a much more of a sugya for the end of kiddushin, but Tosfos brings it over here because we're dealing with this, and this is a tremendous chiddush, but it is the chiddush of Tosfos over here. It varies halachas of these. What is the status of such intermarriages? But as we just mentioned, Tosfos at the beginning, as Rabbi Tzvi Fischer points out, there's going to have to be that there is no kiddushin, there is no prohibition of kiddushin for a non-Jew with a Jewish woman, or vice versa, and therefore there cannot be mamzer there because there actually is no lav. There's no prohibition. If there's no lav, there cannot be mamzeres. Rather, the only thing is, as Tosfos points out, is that kiddushin can take effect because they're not in the parsha of kiddushin. But there is no lav. There is no isser kiddushin, and since there's no isser kiddushin, there cannot be, even according to Rabbi Akiva, in the strictest opinion, there cannot be a mamzer for that, and only in an eved or a shivcha with the Yisrael would there be mamzeres, even according to Rabbi Akiva. Okay, that's